The stale smell in the waiting room did nothing to calm the nausea in my stomach. I looked around and then down at my feet again, wondering what I was really doing here. To my left sat my beautiful wife, Rachel. She, as always, radiated a beauty that never failed to make butterflies flutter in my stomach. To my right sat my daughter, Jasmine, who, in many ways, had been my savior. My thoughts drifted back to the days when I first met each of them. I was a different person then. "Mr. Green," a voice called, bringing me back to the room. "We'll be ready to see you in about 20 minutes. The other witness has just finished testifying." I nodded. For the first time in a year, I would face my ex-wife. The woman I had been married to for 12 years, but so much had changed since then. I would start from the day my life changed forever. It was an ordinary spring day in Albany, New York. I was coming home from working with clients at the local Albany utility company. I hated that job, and Jessica, my ex-wife, had largely forced me into it. "It's safer and more financially secure," she would say. The usual follow-up was, "It's better than construction." I should have realized sooner that the only things she seemed to care about were money and social status. I don't want to talk too much about Jessica, except to say that at 35 years old, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world to me. She was smart, funny, and had loved me to death from the moment we met. I always thought she was out of my league. I was working construction back home in the Bronx when we met. I was tall and fairly handsome, with a constant tan from being outdoors all the time. From the moment we started dating, we were always together. I was her protector, and she didn't mind my lack of formal education, seeming to love me even more passionately because of it. When she earned her master's degree, we moved back to her hometown of Albany and eventually got married. Her parents were far from thrilled about me. Oh no, and they didn't even try to hide their dislike. Both they and her old friends thought she was too good for me and wondered why she married someone they considered beneath her. According to her father, I was a handsome idiot. Nevertheless, we were happy and loved each other more than anything. I was an only child, and both my parents died when I was a teenager, so Jessica became my whole world. I found work in construction, while Jessica secured a very good job at a financial company owned by her father's friend. When the economic downturn hit in 1908, I lost my job, and it was only Jessica's salary that got us through the tough times. This made her parents hate me even more if that was possible. It really affected our marriage. I suppose it's inevitable when the people you love and interact with constantly tell you that your husband is a failure. Unfortunately, it also affected my friends back home in the Bronx. According to them, I was now moving in different circles. Of course, my best friend Joey always stood by me. He was more like a brother to me, and his parents helped me cope with the loss of my own parents. It was Jessica who convinced me to take a job at the utility company. As I mentioned, I hated it. Being indoors behind computers, talking to people on the phone with a fake voice. That's how I imagined hell. But I tried for Jessica's sake and for us. We both hoped to have children someday, but for Jessica, it was more important to build a successful career and to be seen as someone who had it all, including kids. Image, wealth, and status didn't really concern me, but I did everything Jessica wanted and even tried to become the person she wanted me to be. Unfortunately, when you stop being yourself, everything goes wrong, and eventually, you become an unhappy person. I was no longer the cheerful builder from the Bronx who loved to have fun and be around people. I fell into depression almost every day, gained weight, stopped taking care of myself, and rarely socialized, if at all. Yes, I had become an overweight office worker married to a successful financial analyst who attended fashionable dinners and cocktail parties with the Albany elite. I wasn't one of them. They knew it, and I knew it. I pulled into the driveway of our house and was surprised to see Jessica's car in the garage. I got out of the car and walked towards the house with a sense of impending doom. I didn't know why, but when I entered the kitchen, Jessica was sitting at the table with a serious but confident look on her face. There were some papers in front of her, and just as I was about to speak, she interrupted me. "Mikey, we need to talk." Those infamous words hit me like a ton of bricks. I could see she was a bit nervous, but as I sat down, there were no tears on her face. "What's going on, baby?" I asked. "Is everything okay?" She gathered her thoughts, cleared her throat as if preparing for a big speech. I'm sorry, Michael, but I want a divorce, she stated clearly and calmly. My heart sank and my stomach tightened into a knot. I was speechless, feeling as if someone had reached into my chest and grabbed my heart. That terrible feeling of sudden loss, which I had experienced twice before, is the worst sensation you can imagine. It spreads through your body like a virus. I looked at her and, with a trembling voice, managed to ask, "WWY?" I stammered. "I've fallen in love with someone else," she said, looking at me without a trace of pity. I was stunned, but strangely, I wasn't shocked. The old Mikey Green might have caused a scene, but he no longer existed. Jessica had seen to that. I was merely a shell of the person I once was, and now she was delivering the final blow. "How long?" I rasped. "4 months." When I just stared at her, she added, "But now I want us to be together and get married," she declared without any regard for my feelings. I looked at the woman I no longer recognized, while she stared back at a man she no longer knew. "I don't want to know the details, but I need to know why," I finally asked, dreading what her answer might be. She didn't hesitate to respond. "Just look at yourself, Mikey. You're not the man I married. You're overweight, you haven't shaved in years, and when was the last time you had a decent haircut or bought new clothes?" She said, in what must have been a long-suppressed outburst. "You're just a shell of the man I fell in love with. And let's be honest, you were never on my intellectual level, were you?" She added with a mocking tone. "God only knows how many times over the past 10 years I've had to defend you to my parents, friends, and colleagues, explaining to them why we even got married." She continued, and I suddenly wondered where the girl I fell in love with had gone and who this heartless creature sitting in front of me was. "And he's wealthy. I mean, my new man is younger than you, fit, attractive, has a successful business, and owns a large house near Mom and Dad's place in Loudonville." Each word she spoke felt like a dagger piercing my body. "Do I know him?" I asked timidly. "He runs a landscaping company that works next door. He's currently a sole proprietor, but we plan to expand the business together," she added as I continued to remain silent. Finally, she finished and just sat there, waiting for my next question, no doubt hoping to hurt me even more. When I said nothing, she slid the papers toward me. "Dad and his lawyer helped me draft the divorce papers. I think it's a good deal for you. Considering that I paid the majority of the mortgage, Dad suggested a 70-30th split of the house in my favor, which we can sell since I'm planning to move in with Rich." I just looked at her, and she continued, "I think splitting our savings 50-50 is fair, and I won't ask for alimony, though I'm sure I could fight for something if I wanted to." Now I could clearly hear the arrogance and malice in her voice. How had I missed this all these years? I felt like a fool, and she probably thought I had always been one. "Let's be honest, Mikey. I make a lot more money than you do, and my new boyfriend earns a lot too. So I won't touch your pension fund if you sign the papers and don't argue with me about anything." She suddenly stopped speaking when I looked her straight in the eyes. She must have seen a glimpse of the old Mikey because she swallowed hard. I grabbed the pen and signed away 12 years of our life together. I got up from the table, went to our bedroom, packed my things, and returned. She was sitting at the table, reviewing the documents, as I walked past her, out the door and out of her life. "What did she say?" Joey yelled. "Is she completely out of her mind?" To me, Joey is family, and unfortunately, I had neglected him in recent years. But, like true brothers, we can overcome any wrongs and will always be there for each other in tough times. As we discussed what had happened, I heard someone in the background, and Joey was trying to hush them. "Is that Helen?" I asked. "What is she saying?" "Yes, Mikey, she said good riddance to that stuck-up bitch. Joey and Helen were what you'd call no filters. What you see is what you get. And God, how I had missed that. That's who I used to be. Hey, Mikey, Helen has a friend who does investigations for local companies on debtors. I could ask him to look into this guy for you. Check if this asshole is legit and all that." He asked in his usual blunt manner. "I really don't care, buddy," I said gloomily. "This guy screws you over, steals your wife, and you're just sitting there taking it? Damn it, Mikey. She really made a weakling out of you," he said, raising his voice. Damn, that hurt, and Joey must have realized it too. Sorry, man. I'm mad as hell. And I wish you were too, he said in an apologetic tone. It's okay, Joey. I mean, you're right and all. Do whatever you want, I said. I told him a few details I had about this new guy. He was the gardener next door, so it wouldn't be too hard to dig up more information if Helen's friend wanted to. You need to get back in the game, Mikey, and start being yourself again, he instructed before we finally hung up. After hanging up the phone, I leaned back on the cheap motel bed and stared at the buzzing ceiling fan. My head was spinning as I tried to make sense of everything that had happened in my life, not just in the last few hours, but over the past 12 years. Sleep wouldn't come to me, so I grabbed the bottle of whiskey sitting on the table and drank straight from the bottle. For the next few weeks, I did the same thing. I often called in sick to work or showed up drunk, reeking of alcohol, and was sent home because of it. Everyone in the office stared at me. Snide comments were shared behind my back, and I felt like I was watching myself from above, merely participating in life. I was advised to see a doctor, and although that helped, losing my job gave me more time to dwell on the past. I never made it to the Jones and Brown office to finalize the divorce. A letter was sent to my office because no one knew where I was, and no one was going to bother looking for me. I knew that for sure. The letter contained a divorce settlement agreement and a check for $175,000. This was my share of the house, savings, and household possessions. The agreement detailed everything Jessica had mentioned at the kitchen table, and since I didn't attend the meeting, it was finalized in my absence. I had no idea if any of it was legal or fair, but I didn't have the strength to fight it. In any case, it wasn't enough to go up against Jessica and her powerful connections. A month had passed since Jessica told me she wanted a divorce, and I finally deposited the check into my account. I discovered that all our other accounts had been closed, and Jessica had removed her name from our joint account. However, I was aimlessly wandering out of the bank when I heard someone calling my name. At first, I ignored it, but when I finally turned around, I saw Pete and Shelley, my old neighbors. "Hi, Michael," Pete said as he approached me. "Sorry to hear about the divorce," he said nervously. Now his wife, Shelley, she was the nosy neighbor who loved to gossip, didn't take long to chime in. "I can't believe Jessica left you and got remarried so quickly." I looked at her in surprise. I vaguely remembered Jessica saying she wanted to marry that guy, but at the time, I was in such a state that I had forgotten about it. "Oh, you didn't know?" Shelley continued. "I had no idea," I replied with an indifferent tone. "We thought you two were the real deal," Peter said. "Then we see that she's married to Richard Walton." That was the first time I heard his full name, but when I glanced at Shelley, she seemed to flinch and shrink at the mere mention of it. I ignored it, as I suddenly realized that now I had a last name to give Joey's friend, rather than just Rich the gardener from Albany. "He was the gardener who serviced your neighborhood," I said, offering information that wasn't asked for. At that moment, I saw Peter whip around and look at Shelley, who by this time had turned bright red. "Our gardener?" He shouted at Shelley, drawing the attention of passersby. "Why did you choose the red mulch?" he demanded, and I realized I had hit the nail on the head. "No, Peter, no, never," Shelley pleaded. "He tried it on me once, and I put him in his place." Peter had turned red himself and looked quite angry as Shelley continued. "He's a creep, and every time he comes around, I leave for a few hours to avoid him." "I never told you because I knew you'd be furious," she said, taking his hand and pleading with him. "We need to talk," he said before turning to me and apologizing. He grabbed her hand and led her down the sidewalk. I guess that's one more lost client for Jessica and Richard's growing empire, I thought to myself, and for the first time in a long while, I managed to smile. The news of the wedding hit me hard. I fell into depression again and reached for the bottle. I thought it might not be a bad idea to drink myself to death. That way, all the pain would go away and I wouldn't have to continue my meaningless existence. The next morning, I got up from my motel bed and collapsed onto the floor, vomiting. I had officially hit rock bottom. I crawled into the shower on all fours and let the cold water pour over me. When I stepped out of the bathroom, I looked in the mirror and what I saw shocked me. "Screw you," I yelled at the man staring back at me. "I need to get better." I fell to my knees and cried for the first time since my mother died. "I just want to be happy," I screamed, covering my face with my hands. I knew something had to change. The following Monday, I went to my office and got to work. For some reason, my personal mail ended up on my desk. I assumed it had been forwarded there because no one knew where I was living. As I sifted through mostly useless junk, I came across a flyer from a local gym promising to get anyone in shape in 12 weeks. I snorted to myself, thinking it would take longer than that. But, damn it, I thought maybe this is exactly what I need. That evening, when I walked into the gym, I had no idea what the young, beautiful instructor standing before me might think of this old man. At 38, I felt like an 80-year-old, but as I got closer to her, she extended her graceful hand, which I gladly took. "I'm Jasmine," she introduced herself. To say that she thought I was hopeless would be an understatement, but in her beautiful brown eyes, I saw a glimmer of hope for me. They seemed to give me energy, not lust or anything romantic, but honesty and compassion. So over the next week, I managed to move out of the motel and sign a lease for a small one-bedroom apartment in the city, not far from the gym. I decided to focus on my 12-week plan and see where life would take me. I needed to lose about 15 kilograms, and the best place to start was by getting rid of all the unopened bottles of alcohol among my belongings. For the next month, I worked very hard. My life consisted of nothing but work and the gym. Joey and Helen also managed to visit me a few times, no doubt mainly to check on me, but by the end of the month, and thanks to Jasmine's constant support, I had already lost 5 kilograms. Spending almost every day at the gym allowed me to get to know Jasmine much better. One evening after my workout, she agreed to have coffee with me, and I learned a bit about her life. She was raised by a single mother and was studying at the local college to become a full-time fitness trainer and nutritionist. She certainly knew her stuff, and I found myself growing even more fond of her. I told her about my recent divorce and my former life in the Bronx. I admitted that I had hit rock bottom before joining the gym and meeting her. I tried my best not to come across as a desperate loser, but she was remarkably compassionate and emotionally mature for her age. It wasn't until a few sessions later, after I came out of the shower and met her, that I was stunned. Jasmine was talking to a woman who, at first glance, looked like her sister. I know it sounds cliché, but it's true. Jasmine noticed me looking and approached me before I could turn and leave. "Michael, this is my mom, Rachel," she said, smiling as Rachel extended her hand to me. Our eyes met, and I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. My stomach tightened, and I truly lost the ability to speak. The silence grew awkward. "That means he likes you, Mom," Jasmine said with a laugh, saving me from the situation. "He gets quiet when he likes someone," she added, as if she had known me all her life. The truth is, I wasn't always a quiet, shy, and unassuming person. Years of what I now realize was emotional abuse will do that to you. Jasmine left to gather her things, and Rachel and I started talking. When Jasmine returned, she invited me to have dinner across the street. At first, I hesitated, but her persistence made it hard to refuse. I imagined that if she had a father, she would have wrapped him around her finger. During dinner, Rachel was so warm and kind. I quickly realized that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and as the evening went on, I found myself relaxing in their company. There was no need to put on a show or act pretentious with them. They weren't the kind of people who thought they were better than others. Rachel joked a lot, which put me at ease. We briefly touched on our pasts, and I suspected that Jasmine had told her mother about my life. That evening, I left feeling better than I had in months, maybe even years. I even had Rachel's number saved in my phone after she agreed, or rather, insisted on finally helping me sort out the mess on my head. At first, I resisted, but since Rachel was a hairdresser, I gave in. It led to the most delightful laugh I'd ever heard from a woman. Over the next couple of months, Rachel and I became inseparable. When we finally made love, the passion was intense and full of love, and each time it felt perfect. From that moment on, I could only think of her, and at last, my heart began to beat for another woman. I knew we shouldn't rush things because I didn't want her to think she was just a rebound from Jessica. We wanted to make sure our feelings for each other were genuine. Both of us had been treated unfairly in life, so trust was crucial for both of us. Eventually, I took her back to my hometown, where Joey and Helen immediately fell in love with her. One evening, Helen pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "This is the woman for you, Mikey. Don't let her go." I assured her that there was no chance of that happening. "Really? I don't believe it. 80 kilograms? Really?" I said excitedly. "Yes, exactly 80, Jasmine confirmed. "You're back to your ideal weight." "Dad," she said, laughing at her new nickname for me. I was so proud of myself and so grateful to Jasmine and Rachel for helping me achieve this. My new haircut, along with shaving off my beard, probably contributed to some weight loss, or so I thought. One day, Rachel convinced me to shave clean so she could see my face. I laughed at the suggestion. I just hoped she wouldn't be put off by the man underneath. Thankfully, she wasn't. I was on cloud 9. I felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had achieved what I set out to do. I looked great and felt amazing. This was the mindset I had when I used to work on construction sites in New York. I headed to Rachel's house, feeling on top of the world. But when I walked through the door, I was greeted by an anxious and pale Rachel. The worried expression on her face gave me a sense of déjà vu. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked nervously, and that bad feeling crept up on me again. "We need to talk," she said. Suddenly, I felt the walls closing in around me. Familiar sensations returned, and nausea rose in my throat. "Okay," I said as Rachel took my hand and sat me down. "Listen, Rachel, if you're going to break up with me, just do it quickly so I can get out of here," I said sharply, causing her to recoil in shock. "No, darling," she replied, tightening her grip on my hand and pulling me slightly closer. "I don't know how to say this because I don't want you to be angry with me." My sense of fear didn't go away. "I'm pregnant," she hesitantly announced. I was stunned. We were both silent for a few seconds, and her beautiful face tensed as she tried to gauge my reaction. I stood up and took a few steps back. Then I turned to her, looking worried and on the verge of tears. "Whoa!" I shouted at the top of my lungs, simultaneously jumping into the air with my fists raised. Her face lit up, and joy returned to her eyes. "You're not mad?" she asked, her beautiful smile returning. "How could I be mad? I'm going to be a dad," I declared before wrapping her in my arms and passionately kissing her on the lips. We hugged each other for the next 5 minutes. I was the happiest man on earth. Over the next few days, Rachel, Jasmine, and I started looking for a new place to live. Although Rachel had very little savings, I had about $180,000 in my bank account, which was more than enough to buy a house outright. It took less than a week to find a beautiful 5-bedroom colonial-style house in Pine Hills. It needed some renovations, which had scared off other buyers, but given my construction experience, I was thrilled with its potential. Our offer was accepted, and this meant we didn't need to take out a mortgage. On the day we moved into our new home, I got down on one knee and proposed to Rachel. I knew it was quick, but I loved her so much, and she was my one and only. She said yes, and I wish I could say that we lived happily ever after from that moment on, but that wouldn't address the reason I'm sitting here in this courthouse. Just to be clear, I'm not being accused of anything. So, a couple of weeks after moving into our new home, I received a call from Joey. It was a stunning turn of events, to say the least. I had completely forgotten that Joey had asked Helen's colleague to look into the new husband of my ex-wife. And honestly, Joey had done the same. If this had gone on for months, I had no idea what it would have cost me. And frankly, I didn't even want to know what he had found out. Nevertheless, Joey was ecstatic and just had to tell me about his discoveries. I stayed silent as Joey began to speak. "It's all like a house of cards, Mikey," he said, laughing. "Helen's acquaintance did some digging, and after you gave us the full name, everything started to come together. It turns out the IRS and the feds are scrambling." "Wait, what?" I shouted, thinking I had missed most of the story. "What do you mean the feds are scrambling?" "Just listen, Mikey. Just hear this out," he said, trying to calm me down. "Jessica is listed as the director of the landscaping company he owns, and she's in debt, Mikey. I mean serious debt, and that's just the beginning. The house he owned is now registered in Jessica's name and is worth over $1 million, but the mortgage payments are being made through a company called Richwall Enterprises. This company owns both the house and the business. Jessica and Richard are listed as co-owners, and this all started just 6 months ago, likely right after their wedding. I struggled to keep up, knowing that Joey was doing his best to relay what Helen had clearly told him. Helen's acquaintance tipped off the IRS, which, by the way, is covering his fee. I was relieved to hear that I wouldn't be hit with a huge bill. Anyway, the IRS conducted an investigation into Richard Walton and discovered that he's been on their radar. They had his picture. So he's a fraud? I said, stating the obvious. Oh yeah, Mikey, but wait until you hear what happened next, Joey said, teasing me. Well, this investigation caught the attention of a major corporation in Charlotte, North Carolina? I interjected. Yes, Joey said excitedly. The owner of the corporation is named Davis Nolan, and he has a daughter, Julia Reed. She's currently living apart from her husband, Kyle Reed. They have 2 children together, and by this point, I was seriously confused. Go on, Joey, I said, irritated. Listen carefully, man, he said, almost out of breath. Well, it turns out that Kyle Reed is Richard Walton. What? I yelled into the phone, and Joey's ears must have been ringing. Not that he cared, he was too busy laughing his head off. Yeah, and they're still legally married. I think the term for it is bigamy, but that's not even the craziest part, he said, leaving me hanging. This was starting to feel like a Hollywood movie. Well, the FBI got involved, and it turns out this guy has 2 prior convictions. He's been to prison, I think, for drugs and burglary. Mr. Nolan managed to get his sentence reduced on the second charge. Apparently, he's a very influential man. Anyway, the feds conducted an investigation, and this guy, called Richard, made contact with another suspect they were looking for in connection with drug-related crimes. My thoughts drifted back to Jessica, her friends, and her family. I could just picture their faces when they heard the news. I started to smile. But that's not all, Mikey. The FBI and the IRS teamed up and arrested the guy. They found him at a warehouse near his home. And the answer to how someone drowning in debt could afford $1 million house and live a luxurious lifestyle became crystal clear. How, Joey, how? I was hooked. They found heroin, ecstasy, and stolen goods in his apartment and truck. They really think he was planning to run again. His truck was packed with suitcases full of clothes and other belongings. I started laughing, and Rachel joined me on the couch, shaking her head and laughing too. She had no idea what I was laughing about or what was making me so happy. So, what about Jessica? I asked, and Rachel suddenly turned to look at me. I covered the phone with my hand and whispered to her. You won't believe this, I said, shaking my head, leaving her in suspense. Joey continued talking as I put the phone back to my ear. She's been arrested. Somehow, her parents managed to keep it out of the press. But I expect it'll hit the front pages in the next few days. After all, it's big news, he said. Honestly, I think Joey was more excited than I was because, to be honest, any feelings I had for Jessica, whether they were anger or something else, had vanished. I took Rachel's hand and squeezed it just to confirm that fact. After finishing the conversation, I eagerly turned to Rachel and told her everything. She was shocked and amazed because, while she knew Jessica was a total witch, it had never crossed her mind that she could be a criminal. All I could think about was what her parents, family, and so-called social elite must be thinking about her. Poor old daddy had a daughter, a deceived criminal, and that wasn't likely to go over well at the country club. I couldn't help but laugh to myself, and Rachel, understanding what I was thinking, laughed along with me. A few days later, the story was all over the front pages of the local newspapers and on every news channel. I think Jessica's parents still had some influence in society because her name was barely mentioned. Of course, the bigamist and drug-dealing con man was splashed across every page, but the name of his female accomplice, who mingled in elite social circles and was well known in the corporate finance world, wasn't revealed. However, within a week, one newspaper published a photo of the 2 of them, with inmate numbers, but without mentioning Jessica's name. We found out that Kyle Reed was actually 41 years old, not 35 as he had claimed. So, my ex-wife had really left me for an older criminal who had just destroyed her life. Maybe she wasn't as smart as she thought she was. I was simply stunned when I saw my ex-wife. I had to look twice to recognize her. She looked like a shadow of the confident and arrogant woman who had left me almost 8 months ago. She was gaunt and appeared to have aged significantly. Her hair had thinned, and large dark circles had formed under her eyes. I glanced up and saw my beautiful pregnant fiancée, who looked like the complete opposite of her. I felt like the luckiest man in the world, not just because I had Rachel, but also because I had rid myself of my ex-wife and her family. In the following months, everything settled down. We enjoyed our first family Christmas in our new home. Rachel's parents came to visit us. Helen and Joey dropped by, and I was surprised to see that a few of my old friends from the construction days had reconnected with me. They also loved Rachel, and they were the ones who convinced me to return to the construction business. Rachel and Jasmine agreed with them, and that's just one more reason why I love them. In the new year, I quit my job and became self-employed. I worked on construction sites but also took on small jobs locally. Ironically, I also started getting a lot of requests for landscaping work in various neighborhoods. I was even surprised when Peter and Shelley contacted me, but only if I promised not to hit on Shelley. I gave them my word. In March, Rachel gave birth to our twins, Alex and Sophia. In April, we got married in a small ceremony in Albany. It had been just over a year since my divorce from Jessica, and it's amazing to think about how much has happened in that time. However, unfortunately, that wasn't the last time I saw her. My new perfect life was going so well until an unexpected visitor knocked on my door. His name was Andrew Brown from the law firm Jones & Brown, who was representing Miss Jessica Walker in her upcoming trial. I was surprised to learn that she had reverted to her maiden name. Of course, her parents wouldn't have liked seeing the Walker name dragged through the mud. Mr. Brown, settling comfortably in my home, said, "We would like you to provide a good character reference for Jessica. I mean Miss Walker," he suggested bluntly. I laughed. "Why would I do that?" I replied, "Well, you knew Miss Walker better than anyone else before your divorce. You know she's law-abiding and would never get involved in any criminal activities, right?" I wasn't sure if he was asking or asserting this, but even I could see where he was going with it. What if he refuses? A voice suddenly sounded behind me. Rachel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, having obviously overheard our conversation. Mr. Brown looked at me. "Answer my wife's question," I suggested. "Well, we could serve you with a subpoena and force you to appear. If you still refuse, we could press charges and throw you in jail," he said in a threatening tone. My first reaction was to punch him in the face and throw him out the door head first. But when I looked at my wife, I realized I had too much to lose. I had no idea if what he said was true or even legal, but to avoid a courtroom battle, I agreed to his demands. It was just easier that way. And now here I am, sitting in the courthouse waiting room. The trial had been going on for a couple of days, and as my turn to testify approached, I turned to Rachel and whispered, "What should I say, darling?" She took my hand, looked at me with her beautiful brown eyes, and said, "You're the most honest and loving person I've ever known. Just be truthful." I knew that what I was going to say in court probably wouldn't have much impact on the case. My ex-wife's lawyers had convinced me to come, mistakenly assuming I would speak well of her. Perhaps it was the biggest mistake they ever made, because I had no intention of doing anything of the sort. A few days ago, the trial of Kyle Reed concluded. He was found guilty of Class E bigamy, federal charges of possession of Schedule I drugs with intent to distribute, perjury, handling stolen property, and a slew of charges related to fraud against the U.S. government. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison. Even I was shocked by the severity of the sentence. However, in an attempt to reduce his sentence, he implicated Jessica in fraud and trafficking stolen goods. He claimed that she was involved since they had founded a holding company as soon as they were married. What do they say about there being no honor among thieves? The charges related to stolen property were contested, but the IRS arrested her for fraud. "Mr. Green, we're ready to hear you," the bailiff announced. I stood up and took a deep breath. Rachel had moved to the public gallery, while Jasmine was watching the twins in the waiting room. They were sound asleep, blissfully unaware of everything. As my name was called in the courtroom and I approached the stand, I felt the eyes of everyone in the room on me. It was a strange atmosphere. As I took my place, a few people gasped, particularly those sitting behind the defendant. As I was sworn in, I turned to face the courtroom, and for the first time in over a year, I saw Jessica in person. She was dressed in an orange prison uniform and flanked on both sides by a team of high-priced defense attorneys. She was staring at the floor, but I made eye contact with her parents and then with several of her friends who were seated behind her. I noticed a couple of them mouth the words "wow" when they saw me. The irony of now looking down on them from the witness stand didn't escape me. Throughout our marriage, they had all looked down on me. Now, the roles were reversed. Andrew Brown stood up and began to speak. "Thank you for coming today, Mr. Green," he said. "Well, I didn't have much of a choice, did I, Mr. Brown?" I replied, looking down at him. He flinched at my tone, and all eyes turned to him, waiting to see how he would respond. At that moment, Jessica finally lifted her head and looked in my direction. Her eyes widened, and her jaw dropped. She suddenly burst into tears, causing everyone to turn and look at her. It must have struck her that the man she had fallen in love with had returned, while the person she had tried to mold had disappeared. Now she was inconsolable as the judge asked her lawyer if he needed a moment for her. He ignored the suggestion and continued. "Mr. Green, as the defendant's ex-husband, with whom, admittedly, my client was very generous during the divorce, would you agree that the charges against her have even surprised you?" He asked, without waiting for an objection from the prosecutor. I was very shocked, but as for her being generous with me during the divorce, I think you and I have different views on that. I responded confidently as murmurs arose from behind him. I'm sure I saw Jessica's parents talking to someone on the legal team while Jessica continued to sob. "Very well, Mr. Green. But would you say that during the time you and the defendant were together, she was always an honest, hardworking, and law-abiding citizen?" He asked. "Well, she cheated on me for 4 months with a man she described as younger, more attractive, and more successful, so I suppose we have different definitions of honesty again," I replied. I began to think that at this moment, her lawyers realized they might have made a mistake. Remember, he had only threatened to drag me into court, but I wasn't obligated to paint a picture of Jessica as an innocent, ideal woman. I was just being honest, as Rachel had advised. But would you agree that at the time, you were neglecting yourself physically and intellectually? So when someone better came along, could you really blame the defendant for moving on? He said tersely. A nearly unanimous chorus of disapproving groans arose from the witness stand and the prosecution's side, clearly indicating that they found his remark unnecessary. The defense was digging a grave for my ex-wife. The judge restored order, giving me a moment to consider my response. I agree that I neglected certain aspects of my life. It was very difficult living with a woman who controlled my life and whose family and friends looked down on me. The defendant's father once called me a handsome idiot, I said candidly, and the shocked and bewildered expressions on the faces of the defense team were so comical that words can't describe them. At that moment, Jessica just looked at me with pity in her eyes. I had nothing left for her in return. That may be the case, Mr. Green, but there's no evidence that the defendant was ever involved in any criminal activity. There's no proof that during the years you were together, she was dishonest or intended to commit fraud. She paid her bills, even yours for a time, and she never broke the law. Is that correct? He said, noticeably anxious. Objection. The prosecutor rose to her feet. This is improper, Your Honor. The witness is not here to prove that the defendant didn't commit a crime. This is a waste of the court's time. The judge stated that the defense may rephrase the question. Mr. Brown looked puzzled, but he cleared his throat and continued his questioning. Mr. Green, during the years you were together, the defendant was an honest person who paid all her bills, taxes, and mortgage. She even paid your bills for a time, didn't she? He asserted.